appreciate having me on, and I was just trying to get introduced to y'all's material. I noticed some interesting looking documentaries that I'm about to plow into.
Nice.
So yeah, we have a lot of similar interests, so I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing, folks, if you have not checked out jaysanalysis.com, you have got to do it. Jay, before we started recording, I was telling you, you have got one of the coolest vibes on your website that I 100% support. As I was saying, I like to call it the 90s stand-up jet ski vibe.
Yeah.
Lots, it's got that, it just makes me feel at home, brings me back to the coolness of the purple and orange sunsets and some nice techno grid backgrounds.
I'm the D-bag on the 1985, 1990 Yamasaki jet ski with the 20-foot span of water shooting up in the air. Who's driving by your boat and splashing water all over you guys
with some rad wraparound Oakleys with an orange mirror on them. That's so funny.
It makes me sad. I've totally crashed a Sea-Doo, so it just brings bad memories for me.
Oh, come on, man.
Yeah, I just kill the vibe.
Well, so Jay, first of all, I want to introduce our listeners to kind of what you do. A lot of our listeners, they explore the different corners of YouTube that include guys like you. So I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with what you do. But those who are not, can you give us a little bit of rundown of what your mission is, the content you produce, and kind of the vibe you're trying to bring to that area?
Well, it started with just doing film analyses a long time ago. Well, that and I had a blog that dealt with conspiracies and theology and movie reviews, and kind of got tired of that. So I started over with a new website that was just blogging on film. And at the time, I was doing grad work, and I was focusing on psychological warfare in my master's thesis. And I tied that into Hollywood and 007, James Bond, and kind of how Ian Fleming used James Bond for propaganda. So then I just kept blogging and blogging and blogging. I did hundreds of essays on movies and philosophy, geopolitics. I started kind of expanding. And eventually it morphed into doing podcasts, and then that morphs, the kind of the natural track everybody goes down, that morphed into doing more and more videos. So eventually it kind of snowballed and it became a career. About 3 years ago, I started doing it full time. Started doing, speaking engagements, doing comedy stuff, going on big comedy podcasts, meeting with some really cool people. And somebody reached out after I was on Sean Stone's show, and they said, "Do you have a book?" And I said, "Yes," which actually I didn't. I just had a bunch of essays on movies. So I just smashed them all together and said, "Yes, here's a book." So I sent that to the publisher, and they published that. And that led to a TV show offer to do one full production season of a show called Hollywood Decoded, which is based on my book, which you can stream through Amazon Prime or Gaia TV, a bunch of different outlets like that, Roku and so forth. And then that led to some other offers that are in the works. And then I did Hollywood 2, which is more essays. So basically, it's all over the board. It's debate, it's film, philosophy, theology, theopolitics, metaphysics, the occult, esoteric, all of that wrapped into one. So I cover all those topics, and I kind of get bored. So I'll jump around. If I do one thing for a week, it's like, I'm really tired of talking about this. So like the next week, I might just do something completely ridiculous that's just totally weird and satirical. So I have a very weird Andy Kaufman brand of humor that I bring to the table. So it's all that and more.
Radical. Yeah. And, I love that about you. It's kind of, the stuff you got is really all over the place.
Yeah.
And especially in this sort of niche where it's so easy to get kind of locked into one style, one genre, one focus, which there's a lot of value in that. I'll admit, specializing. That's how, we got to be where we're at as a species. But you've certainly got a wide range of things. No matter what you're looking for at the time, Jay's got something to fit your mood.
I do, and I cover all kinds of good movies, bad movies, B movies, you name it. Like my last favorite B movie, I think, was Mac and Me. Yeah,
I haven't seen it, but I know what movie it is.
It's and I did Maximum Overdrive, which is pretty funny if you've never seen Maximum.
Nice. And maybe that might be a good place to start, Gonz, unless you got somewhere else.
No,
But
go for it.
You know, I see a lot of movies, and we don't necessarily focus on individual movies and kind of break them down. I mean, we'll do like a big episode on predictive programming, in which we'll bring a lot of different examples. But over on our Patreon, you know, we do bonus stuff, and usually when I see a movie, that's our bonus episodes are usually where I get to just sit and go through. At least give a rundown of whatever new movie's out and the sort of obvious symbolism that comes in there. Right. And you certainly put a lot more production value into what you do. But one of the most recent ones that I think might just be a fun jumping off point was Aladdin. And just cruising down your website here, I do see that you've got the weird Will Smith blue genie face. Have you gone in? Did you see Aladdin?
No. The only reason we put what I do sometimes on when we do Boiler Room, which is a show with a bunch of different people. We had Aaron and Melissa Dykes on that episode last night. It was a lot of fun. And a lot of times I stick the pictures up that are just ridiculous. They don't have anything to do. The reason that Will Smurf is there.
Good.
The reason Will Smurf is there is because we were talking about the idiocy of transhumanism, the idea that you're going to like download yourself into a zip drive, basically. And I was just making the point that if I get downloaded into a zip drive, which I don't think will actually happen, but if I was downloaded into a zip drive, I want it to be in the shape of a lamp, like an Aladdin's lamp. And
nice.
That way, genies will be real because you can evoke me from your zip drive, and all the mythologies. Yeah, all the mythologies will be real.
There we go. Yeah. And, you know, I don't need to dive too much into it. But one of the interesting things, it's funny you bring up transhumanism in regard to that, because they changed the story around a little bit. And here's an Aladdin spoiler for everybody. So you can skip ahead a couple seconds if you want. But, you know, the whole thing was Genie wants to be a human. And right. So it kind of had this weird reverse transhumanism aspect to it. And, you know, it's interesting when we kind of do some light media criticism into some of the stuff coming out. There's oftentimes a little bit of a reversal that comes into the movie compared to how we see a big trend in the world towards transhumanism and the benefits thereof. Mm-hmm. And I've always find it interesting when a movie does a reversal on that. And I find myself, you know, one considering myself, you know, so woke to the transhuman agenda. And when I see it reversed like that, I even find myself being like, Genie, why would you want to be a human, man? You're going backwards. And that's when I see the mind control really taking hold.
Yeah, I think one of the things I covered in Esoteric Hollywood 1 was the way that for a long time in the propaganda and film, they've been reversing things like that. And they've actually been typically dehumanizing humans and then humanizing the bots. I mean, one of the first films I did a big, long analysis of was Spielberg's AI. If you think back to AI, that's the whole plot. It's a fairy tale. It's a retelling of Pinocchio where the salvific figure, who's the beginning of a new race of beings. If you remember, that's the David character. He becomes the beginning of this new race of, they're basically aliens that are also AI.
Right.
So he's a new Adam character, basically. And then his brother that he's always fighting with, where you have this kind of Cain Abel type of story. The brother Martin is a complete D-bag. He's awful, and of course he's got his he can't walk, so he's crippled, which showing that he's disfigured. He's old humanity. The idea being, of course, that through transhumanist mythology, there will be a new race of beings, and that's the whole point of that movie, is to make humans more bot-like and bots more human-like. And in the process, kind of present a new Gnostic Luciferian type of gospel. So that's one thing I focused on quite a bit in book one, especially in the AI analysis. And they even had the sex bots in there too. I mean, I know that goes all the way back to Blade Runner, but on many levels, we're getting sort of the programming 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago that we're seeing introduced into reality now. You can watch it 20, 30 years ago in the movies.
Right. Movies like Ex Machina, which came out in 2014.
Right.
Do you think there are people out there, really wealthy people, that just, go out into the mountains and create a cave and start doing experiments with AI? And do you think they've achieved anything that's notable or would be notable to the rest of the world that's just being hidden?
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg. He seems to be a bot.
Yeah, we've totally been critical of Zuckerberg's virtual, whole thing.
Yeah, lizard person or AI.
Yeah, the plot of Ex Machina, which I did put in Esoteric Hollywood too. There's a chapter on Ex Machina in there. I think that's entirely plausible. I don't know if there's a real specific example, but who knows what's going on in Plasticine Valley. So I don't trigger any algorithms here by saying the S word.
Yeah, wow, there you go. You're on top of it, man.
If you remember, there's a Bond movie, since I did so much Bond research for grad work. Do you remember View to a Kill?
I do not. I'm not a very good movie guy, so Basil's going to have to just recall the stuff.
So if you go back to the 1987 View to a Kill, which is the last Roger Moore Bond movie, you will find a tremendous amount of predictive programming there with the Christopher Walken character, who is in fact a eugenicist who basically wants to destroy Silicon Valley because he's controlling Silicon Valley. He's like the Zuckerberg of his day, I guess.
Right.
And he basically wants to run everything by destroying everything. So he's got like a breakaway civilization model going on. And of course, Roger Moore saves everybody. But even back as far as 87 with A View to a Kill, they were predicting the power of Silicon Valley. I don't think there's AI per se, but there is definitely the idea of genetically modifying with technology. Basically breeding some kind of new version of humanity. That's the whole ethos of Zorn. That's his name. The ridiculous Zorn Industries is doing this basically. Is that Z for Zuckerberg?
That's called it out. There you go. Coming for you, lizard man. Now here's the thing. I think you go into this quite a bit, and it's something that I'm endlessly fascinated with, and that is in media communication in all sorts of forms and shapes. Communication really happens in the realm of symbolism, symbols, signs, sigils, things like that, and placing those in advantageous places for whatever manipulation you're trying to achieve on your audience there. And I have to imagine in your academic realms, that's a big part of it. I know when I was doing my scholarly studies, that was the main language of Hollywood. And so when you dive into that kind of stuff, I mean, are there trends and things that you're able to pick out? And how much does that inform the work that you do?
Quite a bit. I mean, that's, the book is titled Esoteric Hollywood, and the first chapter is film as a ritual. So I actually considered it from a dramaturgical perspective, because in the ancient world, when they would do plays, they were, at least by their intention, trying to invoke the gods. That was the purpose of the plays, was a reenactment of the stories of the gods. So I went from that perspective, because most modern film analysis and theory does not come from that perspective.
Totally.
They want to talk about the lighting, and they're going to talk about some boring ass technical thing that who cares, because what really matters is the meaning of the stories, not the, it's okay if you want to talk about the technological advances and the lighting and the film and all that. That stuff's neat. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but I'm more interested in the symbolic and hidden aspects, the code behind the film. And so I start with kind of as a springboard in my book, Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon, which doesn't really have a lot of similarity in my book, except in the fact that in the first chapter, he starts by talking about Hollywood as the new Babylon and the gate of the gods. And so that's the jumping point from which I move into my film analysis. And the rest of his book is like a bunch of people that nobody even remembers, like W.C. Fields and all these old 30s era Hollywood people that are dead.
Totally.
So then I move into kind of the Kubrick, the Lynch, the Spielberg, the Hitchcock, 007. That's where I went with my book, and I just picked apart. Probably, I mean, it took a lot of time. It was a lot of essays, a lot of hours went into it. There's 404 footnotes, 363 pages, 404 footnotes. So I don't come at this from I think a lot of people thought that it was going to be, you're just going to like pick out every movie that has an all-seeing eye in it.
Right.
No, that's not what I do. What I do is more of a literary analysis. Like if you had a college class where you talked about Dostoevsky or Flannery O'Connor novels, what I do is the same type of close reading that you would do in a college class with film. And the idea for doing that was, I've always liked movies, and I got kind of bored with the typical movie review, whether you're reading Ebert or, the Rolling Stone guy or whatever. Like that kind of style of movie review is kind of boring to me. So what I wanted to do was integrate film analysis on multiple levels. So it's more of, again, like a literary reading of the movie with, iconographic imagery that's, again, functioning on multiple levels. So sometimes I'm interested in, does this movie have a ritual aspect, like it's movies like 2001 or Eyes Wide Shut? I think Kubrick is intentionally trying to give us a ritual initiation. If it's a 007 movie, there is sometimes esoteric elements to 007 films, which is reflected in Fleming's novels. But typically, if it's something like that, what I'm interested in is the real world geopolitics that might have gone into why Ian Fleming wrote that story or the propaganda. So a lot of different levels going on. It just depends on the topic. And sometimes I even throw in weird 80s movies like Labyrinth, Neverending Story, Legend, these kinds of weird things. So what you notice in terms of patterns is that certain directors seem to have a really keyed in, consistent approach to making esoteric films. People like Kubrick, people like David Lynch, people like, to a degree, Spielberg. Who else?
Well, I think that brings up a good point, which is, it's really easy. YouTube is full of them to go through a movie and pick out specific symbols, like you said, the all-seeing eye or like a checkerboard floor or something like that. And that's all over the place. And while that is valuable for maybe starting a breadcrumb trail into sort of the esoteric backgrounds of some of the films, what you said really sparked something in me, which is, when you talk about occultism or esoteric practices or mystery schools or magic or whatever, there's a few things that really are important to a successful practice, if you will. And a lot of that is repetition. A lot of that is pulling on mythic storylines or mythic, kind of like you said, playing through mythology, as well as gaining as much psychic attention on what you are trying to do, whether you call it an incantation or a spell or something like that. So, that kind of stuff is all involved in the playing out of these sort of occult practices. And not only can you just find symbols in these pieces of work, but the pieces of work themselves are, part of an active practice in some cases. And that's kind of what you're talking about, right? With when you find filmmakers who repeatedly play these sorts of things out, is the implication there that by watching these movies or something, it's giving power to perhaps whatever occult purposes they may have intended?
Yeah, that's one aspect for sure. And it just depends kind of on the director, on the film, on the purpose of the film. A lot of different possibilities there. But my second chapter in the book is called Occult Empire, where I go into how you could look at the occult as something where you're intending to ritually charge things, where you're intending to alter people's perceptions, where you're intending to influence people's subconscious. All those things are all essentially trying to do the same thing. And thus you could see the similarity to psychological warfare, because psychological warfare wants to do the same thing. You know, like Sun Tzu said a long time ago, you want to influence the enemy's mind. And if you can win the enemy over in the mind arena, you don't have to, get killed in the process.
Right.
Save your troops, and it's better for everybody in the long run from that perspective. And so there's a lot of different aspects to which film has functioned on multiple levels as propaganda, as a kind of spell. You can put a spell on people through film. Hence film as ritual, and hence Hollywood as the occult empire. And you need look no further than the fact, again, that a lot of directors have been involved in the occult. A lot of directors, producers, Hollywood moguls have been in secret societies of various types and flavors. A lot of A-listers have been in all those different arenas. And at the same time, many of them have also been spies. They've also worked for intelligence agencies,
right?
Different national intelligence agencies, different mafia groups. So what I did, since I talked about a lot of that in part one, I felt like I left out the mafia, which is a huge aspect to Hollywood. So the first part of Esoteric Hollywood 2 deals with the mafia side of things. So there's all of this really fascinating interconnection that most people don't think about when they think about Hollywood. You know, they might think about one side of things, like, oh, did you hear that Jimmy Stewart at one time was a FBI informant? No, I didn't know that. Well, yeah, maybe that's why he was in the movie called The FBI Story, where he plays an FBI hero. So you start to see these parallels where people actually sometimes, not always, but sometimes they'll choose a role or they'll play a role in a film that actually kind of reflects what might be going on in real life.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you... Sorry, Gons, to interrupt there if you had something to add. Well, I was going to jump over. I need to know, have you heard of the film Robot Jocks?
Is that that 80s movie?
Yes.
Oh,
well,
I watched it in the 80s, yeah.
Released in 1990.
Okay,
and it is my favorite sort of B-list. Maybe one of my favorite movies ever. Just for all the wrong reasons. But it's a movie I can't stop talking about. And I don't know, man, I might need to make a donation or something to have you take a look at that. And
it's right up your alley.
Some core brainwashing there in my own story.
Well, I'll have to go back and watch that one. I do remember as a kid renting the VHS. So like we would go to this place that had, back in like 1989, 90, there was like one VHS store near us. And I think DVD was pretty new at that time. It was just coming out. Yeah. But I don't think our store had DVD. So they had these little color-coded things where you could, I'm not kidding, like still in 80 to 89, 90, you could still rent Betamax. And
oh, wow.
My dad was such a cheapo that he wouldn't get a VHS player. He still had the Betamax, like even up into the 90s.
Wow.
So when we went to the movie store, we had to pick all of the movies that had the color coded, like the red. If there was a red code, then I could watch it because they had a Betamax version of it. So I do specifically remember watching Robot Jocks in Betamax, but I don't remember anything other than it's like kids, kind of a Voltron thing where does it have to be with?
Yeah, it's got some like
people inside robots, right?
Right. There's no more war. Geopolitics is settled with one-on-one giant robot battles, and of course, Russia is the enemy. And there's a little bit of genetic, transhumanism involved. Right. There's all sorts of stuff there. But
they lay it out pretty early in the film too. I was very surprised. You didn't let me watch, Basil. I watched like the first 10 minutes. And you stopped me because we were going to try to watch it.
Yeah, we got to do it together. Yeah. It's going to be a special moment.
Yeah. I did, in part 2, I did cover some of those 80s movies that had a lot of predictive programming like that. Like, do you remember Running Man?
I never saw Running Man.
Oh, man, you guys are missing out, man. That's a Running Man with Arnold. It's almost like every old movie that you find has at least one element that will blow your mind about where society would be. So actually there's 2 scenes that really stick out in Running Man, and it's kind of a B movie, but it does kind of accurately picture the way we view entertainment in our day. But the other thing that really stands out is that Arnold he orders his plane ticket on the internet. This is 1987. I don't think most people knew what the internet was, unless you were
impressive.
Yeah, but he goes on this thing called the InfoNet, and he orders his plane tickets, and he's trying to get out of the country. And then there's another scene where they completely CGI'd. It's actually Jesse Ventura in the scene, but they completely CGI an event to frame Arnold.
Oh, some deep fake stuff.
Exactly, some totally deep fake stuff, and that of course turns the whole society against Arnold. And the whole plot is basically a Hunger Games type of thing. So he's on the run. Everybody's enjoying this kind of Hunger Games scenario. Which, by the way, Survivor, that's preparing us for what is going to come. They're actually going to eventually have these kind of global gladiatorial chase games. I'm not kidding. Yeah. Because one of the things I do at my website is what's called a globalism books talk, where I go through the top writings of the global elite. I think we've done 28 or 29 of those now. And basically I lecture on the first half of the book. And then if you want the full lecture, you subscribe to my website. Well, one of those that I did was Jacques Attali's book, Brief History of the Future. And he's the Kissinger of France. He's kind of like Hollande, Mitterrand, kind of handler type of guy. A total globalist dude. And so in 2006, he wrote this book saying everything that we're seeing now. So he said by 2020, everybody will be watching live streaming. It will be global eventually. And there will be eventually gladiatorial games. So Hunger Games, Running Man, that's what's coming.
Yeah, and
That's
even
crazy.
even in the realm of gaming, I mean,
Yes.
First off, streaming, that's a huge part of gaming nowadays. But also the new genre that kind of popped up just in the past couple of years, which when I was a kid, me and my friends basically just were wishing that this genre existed, and that's Battle Royale, which is, your Fortnites, your Player Unknown Underground, your Apex Legends, stuff like that, which is basically one game with like up to 100 players all in the same arena, which is only recently just did the network technology exist to connect that many people in one game server. And they just battle it out, start with 100 and last man standing type thing. And it is a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, it's huge in the world of gaming. And that's just kind of what we're talking about. It's basically a Hunger Games thing. So you're dropped in with nothing. You run around, try to find supplies, and then last man standing wins. So even the kids, talking about a worldwide gladiatorial sport, it's basically happening now, just in a virtual sense.
Far wherever you are, something.
Something.
I got lost thinking about Celine and her. By the way, I'm sure you saw her pretty satanic fashion line that she came out with.
Was that the one for the kids?
Right. Yes,
for the children's fashion line. Yeah. Wow, incredible.
New World Order death fashion for kids, exactly.
Yeah.
I did want to add real quick though that
sure.
On that last point you made, do you remember Tron?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
And that's another one where, obviously it's kind of a predecessor to the Matrix, but with Tron, you have it's the gamification of society. Basically, everything becomes gamified.
Yeah.
So what will happen is that economies and electronic cash. I'm not saying all crypto's bad, by the way. I do think crypto has potential, but the electronification of everything and the gamification of everything is something that the big tech elite have been giving lectures on recently. They've been talking about this a lot, and that's ultimately to merge gaming and economy together.
Totally.
And that's where we're going. So you're absolutely right to look at games and gaming, and Tron was actually predicting this, where the new reality, which is the virtual, so the synthetic will replace the real, and it will be centered around gaming.
Yep, and there's an actual Tron cryptocurrency company, or I guess it's a currency / smart contract thing.
Yeah.
I
Don't worry,
wanted
Gons.
to,
I'm staying practiced up. I'll be your sugar daddy in the next gamified economy.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I got you, bro.
Great. I wanted to touch back on some of the movies that I don't know if you've ever touched on it, but this is a film I've never really brought it up because it's so bizarre and I don't really know what to do with it. but it's a movie called The Holy Mountain. It was released in 1973 by Alejandro Jodorowsky.
Right.
And it is like it is just, I don't even know how to, it's just, you were talking about like ritual as film, but
yes.
I mean, this is just like not even just a blatant, it's just a next level type of film that I don't think people should watch necessarily unless they're doing analysis on it or breaking things down. But even then, it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it is difficult. Right. I'm very familiar. I've seen it a couple times, and one reason I've refrained is just because it is kind of a grueling watch.
Yeah.
But both that and El Topo are definitely pretty hardcore hermetic films.
Right.
I think with Jodorowsky, he has a lot of Sufi and Gnostic influence. So you're looking at basically a ritual on film that is alchemy, more or less.
Yeah.
But in the midst of that alchemical, hermetic, Gnostic presentation, you do have some predictive programming. For example, you have the idea of the sex machines. You have the idea of there's a really powerful scene where they show the coffin apartments that are coming, like in the future when there's these very regimented green Agenda 2030 type cities. They basically live in a smart city, and you live in a coffin. Like your home is literally a coffin. And so there's a very powerful prediction there on the part of Jodorowsky of what's to come in the dystopian megacities, which I do have a couple chapters that deal with dystopian megacities as well. And I think that, I mean, it's not that necessarily he was doing rituals and could see the future. That's possible. I think sometimes there is potential for that, especially in the arts. The arts can have a literal predictive component to them. But in the case of Jodorowsky, he was probably hanging out with elites who were telling him what they were going to do, in the same way that Philip K. Dick was in the circles of the Silicon Valley elite. So what he's writing in Ubik and some of his other essays, the reason his films or his short stories, which become films, obviously, Minority Report, so forth, Blade Runner, the reason they're so powerful is because he knew what Silicon Valley was planning.
Right.
And it's the exact same with probably Jodorowsky in those elite circles.
Yeah, there's a description of the plot that's from 366 Weird Movies. And just the first line, it says, a thief who looks like Jesus Christ silently wanders through a bizarre and depraved city where an armless and legless midget companion participating in a lizard circus where toads are dressed like conquistadors bearing a crucifix through the streets and eating from Jesus's body and meeting a prostitute with a chimp. There's an
Very Crowleyan. Very Crowleyan.
There's an antichrist element to it. And
absolutely.
I wanted to hear your comments on that because this is deliberate, but then, I feel like, because Basil brought up earlier how they flipped the script kind of with the transhumanist thing, kind of championing the human in a sense, or at least creating that relative element. What are your thoughts on the thematic approaches to using the Antichrist perspective in films like Holy Mountain, but then in all of your analysis?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of films in that vein that have a similar aesthetic and a similar Antichrist type of spirit. There's the Devils of Loudon. That film's pretty gruesome in the same way. I always forget that there's the Armenian filmmaker who was a Soviet filmmaker who did Garden of Pomegranates. It's the same type of look and feel. Have you seen that?
No.
It's the same type of stuff.
Totally not in tune with some of these
Guns has a 2-year-old, so
yeah.
Right. Well, you're not missing much, but it's just really bizarre. Actually, what made that film famous in part was that the techno band Juno Reactor used Garden of Pomegranates in their video. But anyway, Jodorowsky is consciously using the satanic and Antichrist imagery for multiple reasons. I mean, he probably sees the film as ritual. He probably sees it as, I think he's really into poetry, if I recall. I mean, I haven't read about him in a long time, but so he probably sees it like a poetic presentation of symbolic, non-linear imagery. So, I mean, it is telling a story, but it's not telling a linear story. And much of the esoteric and the occult is focused on the cyclical, eternal return, these kinds of ideas that come out of Nietzsche and ancient Greek paganism and so forth, ancient Hinduism. So there's all that going on, and then with the transhumanist element, there's the tendency to see it as both a potential for. I mean, I think they see it as power. Like, in other words, transhumanism could be a means by which the elite attain godhood, and a means by which the elite enslave others.
Right.
It's just a question of how that power is used. That's from their perspective, right? So I don't think that Jodorowsky is necessarily presenting some anti-transhumanist message. I think that, as with all of the transhumanists, they probably, or excuse me, all the occultists, they believe that there's the potential for something to be used for good or evil. So that's probably the way he views it.
Right. Yeah, the whole duality concept and everything.
Exactly.
Touching back to the gamification concept, I don't know how real this story was, but it came out, I think, in April of this year, 2019, and one of the headlines was, "A hunt is on for Satoshi's treasure, a 1 million Bitcoin prize." And there's this pretty cryptic thing called Satoshi's treasure. You can go to the website and start, figuring out different, they give you geostationary orbit keys, and you got to figure out, unlock it and blah, blah, blah. I don't know if anyone's made any progress with it, but that sort of thing where, again, it blurs the line between, is this a game, or are we literally fighting for our lives for, whatever, finding 100 Bitcoin or whatever, or a million Bitcoin. So yeah, I think it's, and again, I don't know if this is true. I don't know if it's caught steam, but you can totally see these feelers are being put out there. And as we move along, it'll be interesting to see what players will be staging some of this stuff, right? I could picture a guy like Elon Musk, putting together some kind of giant, gamified thing where it's kind of blurring the line between just playing a game and for like a game show, winning a thing or whatever. But anyway, what types of platforms do you see as a potential for some of those elements specifically? Like, do you see Amazon? Do you see Facebook? Who do you think, or do you think it's going to be something out of crypto? What do you see there?
Well, I'm a Bitcoin zillionaire, so you could go watch my video, Bitcoin zillionaire, where I actually tell you the formula of how also yourself to become a Bitcoin zillionaire. It involves basically buying slums and then selling them for pesos, and then you get into the peso market, and then you sell the pesos for overpriced, and then you buy Bitcoin. So it's a foolproof method. It's one of my favorite videos I've made, and it's Bitcoin Zillionaire. So if you want to learn how to become a Bitcoin Zillionaire, it's all very legal on the up and up. You can go watch my video, Bitcoin Zillionaire. I'm being silly. That is a real video I made, but
I know I'm looking at it right now, and you nailed it.
Yeah. I think there's the potential for any of these tech companies to be the forerunner in that kind of a corporate overlord, Wayland Yutani Corporation future that we're going into. Whether it's Blade Runner or Alien, it's pretty much, those movies are telling us that one thing I like about those is that there's one big corporation that runs everything in the future.
Right. And, I remember that being a theme even growing up, like the giant evil corporation and
right.
Yeah.
It's in my Blade Runner analysis, I really focused in on that we were kind of being prepped for that, like almost like it's inevitable. Like, you have to have one giant corporation. It's just inevitable because all the science fiction movies showed you that you're going to have one corporation running everything. But it could be any of them. And that's because I don't really think at the top these companies are in competition. I think they're essentially creations of the military-industrial complex. They're allowed to compete for a while at a certain level. But at the tip top, you'll notice it's just a revolving door between government and the heads of these companies. And one person goes from Bilderberg to DARPA to head of whatever, Google, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're all kind of the same. Yeah. The people that create the AI for Apple are the people who worked at DARPA. So it doesn't matter. They're all the same. And if one of them dies, it's kind of like Enron. So what? There's a many-headed Hydra. You just chop one head off, and then another Enron pops up. Right. So they don't really care. And I think that when you look at the global agenda going forward, and you see that it is global, and that it's the Fortune 100 that promote all the same stuff across the board, you start to realize that at that level, there's not really competition.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because one of the sentiments you often hear in the world of cryptocurrencies is that we're, decentralizing from these central governments and central corporations, and we're putting power back into the hands of the people. Mm-hmm. And it's a very enticing libertarian type of a message. At the same time, and I understand that perspective, but at the same time, it's like, well, yeah, but you're doing it through this like very limited technology that they are essentially giving us, allowing us to use. So can't get too excited about it. But speaking of like prophecies and stuff, I don't know how much of, prophetic type of analysis you do in terms of the Bible and how it might relate to things going on around us. But do you see any relationship there with, perhaps the mark of the beast and the image of the beast as it relates to some of these things we're talking about?
I do. I have a series of talks that I did on biblical theology, philosophy, et cetera, which I just kind of set aside as a playlist on my channel. But I don't. I have a talk on Daniel, for example, the book of Daniel. I'm not convinced yet that we're necessarily in the final end days, but I definitely think that at the least we're seeing patterns in history where we, as John says in his epistle, there are many antichrists.
Right.
So whether or not this is the final end days, it is at least still the pattern of what you see in the apocalypse. So I think a lot of what's in the apocalypse was referring to the first century in terms of what John was describing about the Roman Empire. You see that specifically when John talks about Nero's name being 666. That actually translates to Nero very well. I'm not saying that it's only fulfilled in 70 AD in the first century. I think that there's a mirror pattern. If you look at Daniel and Jeremiah, you see that same pattern of mirroring where Daniel says that he understood when the defiling of the temple in his day, in the future, would happen when Antiochus Epiphanes would defile the temple under the Maccabees. Daniel predicts that several hundred years ahead of time, he says, based on reading Jeremiah. So the original 586 BC defiling of the temple by the Babylonians was a pattern that would reoccur during the time of the Maccabees, which if you have the Orthodox Bible, then you know what Maccabees is. That's one of the books that the Protestants did not include in their canon.
Right, it's in between phase, yeah.
Correct. So it's the intertestamental period. And so then what happens in 70 AD, if you look at Luke 21 and Matthew 24, when Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple, he says that the apostles will see this event, the one standing there in front of him. This is actually what happened in 70 AD when the Romans destroyed the temple. So this is a mirrored pattern that goes again from 586 with the destruction of the temple to the time of the Maccabees where it's destroyed again. There's another defiling that happens under Ptolemy, which is 3rd Maccabees. And then there's another defiling destruction of the temple in 70 AD, which I think the apocalypse and the Olivet Discourse talks about. That being said, what I believe we're going to see and what most of the church fathers said about this was that there will be mirroring of this in history. So you'll see the rise, the same sort of trend towards Babel, towards the world, kind of trying to unify under this banner of anti-God sentiment, this kind of anti-Christ sentiment that you're talking about. You're going to see the attempt to try to have a unified global currency and all these types of things. And so I would say that if we do see more of the prophetic events very clearly being fulfilled, then I would go ahead and say, yeah, we are in the last days. I'm just hesitant to adopt that kind of attitude so that we don't become like fatalistic, like, oh, well, it's all screwed from here on out.
It's all over next week.
Yeah, it's all over. So so I think we still have a duty to promote, good things in culture and not sort of surrender culture to the rapture and this kind of nonsense, in my view. But yes, when it comes to the spirit of Antichrist, the move towards everything being controlled, tracked, traced, absolutely, it's totally the spirit of Antichrist.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because I do see in Revelation a lot of restoration that takes place immediately after a kind of a judgment, like a hardcore judgment. I know there's a lot of illusion and stuff like that there, but in terms of, it's almost like we've talked about this before on the podcast, where it's becoming difficult to tell if it's self-fulfilling prophecy or if it's like actually prophecy that's starting to look like being fulfilled. Again, we're not saying we're in the end now. Things can go on for several decades, perhaps centuries. We don't know.
But we've at least got several decades.
At least several decades.
Just to have the global controlled currency. I mean, just even the infrastructure is not yet there for that.
Right, so exactly. Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of work to be done in that regard if we're going to really see a whole lockdown that is sort of seems to be described there. But I like your kind of stance on it and your position on it. I don't think it's a bad place to be, especially because this again. What are we going to do? We're going to set a date for next year, or like Basil did back in 2012, and just run back with our tails between our legs? Or
well, did you know that Terence McKenna is the first person to talk about 2012 is the time when the Mayan calendar was going to be the end of the world? And if you just listen to the spirit of the mushroom, then you would understand. Terence McKenna 2020.
There is that his new call, 2020?
Like he was going to run in 20.
Yeah,
it was a joke I made a long time ago about somebody said, who are you voting for in 2020? I said, I'm voting for Terence McKenna and the mushroom for VP.
I'm going to move forward just a little bit here, Jay.
And, by the way, he is, if I recall, he's the first person to talk about 2012 in the Mayan calendar. Did you know that?
Well, that I did kind of know.
Okay.
I didn't know if he was officially the first person, but he was.
Well, maybe somebody did. Maybe the Mayans did.
Mayans
that
themselves.
Makes sense. So you cover a lot of different stuff in a lot of different ways. I got a question for you, which is, in everything that you do and the people you talk to, whether it's on air or off, what is a question that you wish more people were asking? Did I stump you?
You did. You threw me for a loop there, because usually the questions are always the same. That's a good question if you threw me for a loop. I did a podcast with a guy that was all practical stuff. That was interesting.
Because most of the
time, like what do you do when you wake up? Like, what's your favorite book? What do you recommend young men do? Should you start a business or get a job? A lot of weird kind of practical questions.
Yeah.
That was a really cool podcast, because I wasn't used to that. I was so used to the, what's the meaning of this? I'll sing I in this movie. Why is there?
Sure. Yeah.
But so those were good questions. But I don't know, man. I've really been enjoying the ability to integrate a lot more comedy, and so I kind of wish people would branch out into talking about comedic topics, because I do it a lot. I talk about it a lot. I do a lot of impersonations, a lot of voices, and people do appreciate that and they talk about it. But it's like everybody wants to talk about all the serious, dark stuff all the time, which I don't mind. It's just that, you know what I mean? Like, after you've blogged on this topic, you blogged on this topic for like 11 years, you kind of want to talk about and do other stuff. So,
I totally get it, and that's a thing that, I have another podcast that kind of addresses that a little bit, called the Joyspiracy Theory. And it's, it was at a point where, it got so deep into this stuff, and, after a while it kind of starts to, it's just cycles of different stuff to be paying attention to, and it's all very
how many times can we talk about butt sex magic? You know what I mean? It's like, after a while, it's like, I'm really tired of talking about butts and spiritual powers coming out of butts, and it's like, come on, dude, let's talk about something else. It's kind of gross, dude. So like, let's talk about Andy Kaufman. Like, what's Andy Kaufman's funniest bit? Something like this.
What is Andy Kaufman's funniest bit?
I think the funniest one, and I used to do stand-up, and this is what inspired me. I'll tell you a quick funny story. So Andy Kaufman did this thing where a lot of people know about it. You probably heard about it, but he went to a college when he was touring, and he did a stand-up bit where he walked out with this ascot and like a fancy suit and a pipe, and he sat in this fancy chair, and he started reading The Great Gatsby. And everybody was there for Andy Kaufman to do comedy, right. And he just literally just starts reading from page one, and he gets like 5 pages in, and people realize, oh, ha ha ha, you got us, and so they laugh, and he keeps going, and he just keeps going, and he keeps going. So Andy Kaufman is the original troll,
right?
So eventually the crowd gets furious. They're literally throwing tomatoes, right? So he's like, okay. So he walks off stage briefly, and then he rolls out a record player. And he says, okay, it's time to move on. And so he moves the microphone over by the phonograph, and he puts a record on, and it's a record of him reading The Great Gatsby. And so everybody dies laughing, and then he just kind of lets it go. So I got inspired one time, and I went to it was a kind of a liberal setting, and I took Karl Rove's autobiography, which I thought, what's the most boring pseudo-conservative book I could even think of? Well, it would be Karl Rove's biography. So I took it, and I just started reading Karl Rove's biography. I didn't have the same response. It was a little snickering at first, but anyway, so yeah, that was fun. I mimicked Andy Kaufman there on that.
There you go. And it's, hey, it worked out for him. Why not? And so, I mean, there's a lot of power. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of power in doing something different, and not just for other people to make whatever new content or whatever, but also to keep yourself engaged in what you're doing. I mean, it's much more fun and fulfilling to do something, obviously, that you enjoy doing, but especially keeping a light heart about stuff. I think that integrating comedy, you could say integrating comedy into the sort of education about this stuff and spreading the word and that kind of stuff, and certainly there's value to that.
There's an interesting way in which comedians just historically have been sort of the deliverers of truth. They can kind of speak truths and stay kind of in the realm of, hey, it's just a joke or it's just a story, and they don't have that same kind of accountability as
although people are catching on to that, and they're starting to crack down on comedy.
Right. Yeah, I have noticed that.
But for me, yeah, you're right. And it was just natural, because what happens is when you do this kind of stuff, there's a kind of a transition that you go through where you start out when you do this kind of stuff and you just kind of want to read the facts. And then over time, you kind of let open more and more of your personality to your audience. And I used to be afraid of that, but that's actually a good thing. It's a necessary thing, because the way media works now is people are interested in people. That's a much better approach if you want to try to do this for a living than trying to just be like the factual journalist and all that. That's like the old model of doing things, and it doesn't work that way. So for example, I used to do just straight up film analysis, and then I would do like a voice of Nick Cage or whoever, and somebody finally said, do your next video analysis that's 10 minutes long of a Nick Cage movie in the entire Nick Cage voice for the whole video. So actually I did this. I did a whole video where it's Nick Cage analyzing his own movie. And I was happy with it the way it came out. I did another video where I was analyzing the Jordan Peterson Slavoj Zizek debate. And somebody was like, well, you better, include the two voices of those guys debating in the midst of the video, which I did. And that's a much better, more entertaining, I'm all for infotainment is what I'm trying to say. Like a lot of people criticize infotainment. I'm all for it.
Yeah, some people don't get it for sure. But I just have to tell you, this is not really a question, but I was one of the videos that I watched recently and I really liked was the Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, and Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
And just because I like when you dive into philosophy, and I've kind of been a fan of philosophy, armchair, over the years. But the way you said Kierkegaard, that's been stuck in my head for weeks.
What did I say? Don't remind me.
Dude. You sit there, every time you say his name, you say Kierkegaard.
Søren Kierkegaard. Oh.
And that's been ringing in my head for weeks.
It is weird how that works. So see, the only reason I got to talk to you is because I did some ridiculous on the cuff thing. So pretty much everything, by the way, that I do it's all improv. I don't plan anything. I don't write. Video was just me reading an old philosophy essay I'd written, but anytime it's voices and that kind of, it's just all on the cuff. Because I've always enjoyed improv. My buddy and I, when we used to do theater in high school, we would always just enter the improv routines or competitions, and we were pretty good. We did good at that. So I find that more enjoyable than if you try to write a stand-up routine. It just seems very rote and very boring. So I'm always just more interested in the just crazy, on the fly, just going wild type of comedy.
Yeah, it's definitely more fun for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But
But I'm glad you liked it.
No, I love it when you get into philosophy. It's just analyzing philosophy in that way, I think, just gets to the nitty gritty of what's being carried out in the symbolism and the messaging and all that. It kind of gives you the foundation.
When I was starting undergrad, we had a professor, and I met with him, and I was like, well, I want to do philosophy, but I'm worried, like, what can I do with this degree? If I study philosophy, like, how am I going to make money if I don't get a PhD?
Right.
And he said, you won't. And the only other option is comedy. He said, I think Steve Martin did philosophy.
Right.
So basically that was my options. I could go get the PhD, spend $80,000, or try to just be a wacky comedian guy. And I remember talking to another professor, and he said, "Well, what are you going to do if you don't get your PhD in philosophy?" I said, "I'll probably do comedy." And he laughed. He said, "You can't do that. You'll never make it." Well, here I am.
You had your first audience there if you made him laugh.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So it shows him.
But thank you for I do integrate philosophy as part of the teaching approach, because I think this is the way education is going. Is that education in the future won't be so tied to the establishment and the university system. That's kind of dying and going away. That's the old model. People are going to just go and seek out. I mean, as long as the internet allows us to, unless the internet goes away or something, kill switch or whatever. But as long as people have the ability to seek it out, they're going to research what they want to research. So for part of the way that I make a living isn't just the books and the Hollywood stuff, but I also teach philosophy. Like I teach lectures to people. I tutor people personally.
Wow, sweet.
They just pay me directly. So that's a big part of how I make a living, actually, is through philosophy. So all of those elements are there. And it's just a matter of over time kind of letting your personality spill forth. And I think that, so people say, "Well, what do you do?" And I'm just kind of like, well, this is really just a reflection of me. Like all the stuff that you see is just my interest, basically.
Yeah. That's interesting. I was poking around your website, and we get we're lucky. We have supporters, and we've gone through Patreon, and we've tried several different ways of trying to make this a full-time gig. And we have some very generous supporters, but learning the lesson of how difficult it is to monetize something like a podcast, which essentially should be free, or is free in our case. I see you have a membership area on your website and things like that. We've had a number of, people ask us constantly about starting a podcast and how to do that and how to get it monetized. And I say, if you figure it out, you let us know. But just asking for a friend, what exactly does your full-time sort of monetization look like? I mean, you mentioned doing personal philosophy courses and a membership area on your website and stuff like that.
So basically what I did was, about 2.5-3 years ago, I got the idea to do talks based on books I'd read, because I read a whole bunch, had all this knowledge, and I thought, well, how can I make a living from having knowledge and reading books a lot? So I thought, well, I can just do lectures. I don't have a problem speaking before cameras or audio or whatever, and presenting lectures. I wanted to be a professor. So why not do that and then basically just charge people for the second half? So that's what I started doing. I went with a half model 3 years ago. And that has grown very well. I do good with that. That's my main means of income, is just to basically teach people philosophy. Now, there's other subjects I cover. Sometimes I do interviews with people. Sometimes I do geopolitical analysis. Sometimes I do, like I said, the globalism book series is part of it. So it's broad as well. And some of the Hollywood content is half and half. Like I've done a few documentaries, just kind of mini docs, I call them, that are half and half on certain important films or whatever. So there's just a members section that people subscribe to and they get access to. And I bill it like you're getting a graduate school education for $4.95 a month or $60 a year, and it's done very well. People really enjoy it. But and I, like you said, I also have people I consult often who are like, tell me how to do what you do. And there's a lot more can be said about the specifics, but main thing is that it's a lot of work. I mean, you basically, it becomes, if you're trying to start out doing it, it's difficult, because if you have a day job, you're basically having to do this in all your spare time. So it's like another part-time job if you're doing it part-time, which I did for a long time when I was working in school. And then eventually you can kind of, if you save up or whatever, you can kind of branch out, and then you start buying new equipment, you start getting more computers, you start doing this, you start doing that, adding this service, moving, you just kind of build on it, and you kind of move through these levels and phases of doing it. And once you're able to do it full time, you can have, obviously a lot quicker exponential growth, because you can devote all your time to it. But then the downside of that is that you kind of don't have a life anymore. I mean, pretty much from the time I wake up,
always working.
It's always work. Yeah, from the time I wake up until late at night. I mean, this is all I do. Yeah. But I'm also very driven, so I want to have success in what I'm doing. And in order to cover a lot of areas, you kind of have to consistently work.
Yeah, totally. Sure. I mean, that's kind of the switch. And, you want the freedom. You don't want the 9 to 5. Right. So you want to do your own thing, especially in podcasting and stuff like that, which Gons and I love. And we've, had our own successes over the years. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you trade in your 9 to 5 job for a 24/7 job.
Exactly.
Yeah, especially with your cell phones now, your smartphones, you can be out and about. And you're still reading articles or looking up things, and it's just always. It definitely can be a little unhealthy sometimes, and
it is, yeah, and it's difficult too when you get to the point where, like, if you have a lot of people you're tutoring, and you have a subscription service, and you have Patreon, and you have YouTube, and you have
sometimes you can
people on Twitter. So you're just like, it's almost impossible to keep up with 50, 60 messages coming in a day. And it's just, going to be exponential. Hopefully, things keep growing. So, it gets to the point where eventually, I guess you have to hire people, and you got to have, other people working with you or whatever. But because it's getting to where,
yeah, you can just clone you and build an AI based on your work patterns, and you're good to go, man.
That'll be the day. That'll be the day. So, you've talked a lot about philosophy. You mentioned it quite a bit here, and it sounds like you've got quite a good grasp on philosophy. How exactly does that fit into your life, your personal life, your work? Mm-hmm. Is there a specific philosophy that you sort of focus on? And then, I might ask the same about faith.
Well, ultimately, I'm a religious philosopher. When it comes to the direct application of philosophy, when I do apologetics or debates, I use the transcendental argument, presuppositional apologetics. I was trained in that school. I went to Monson Seminary when I was younger. And then when I did my undergraduate work, I focused on analytical philosophy, some continental philosophy,
you might need to give a little bit of a description of a lot of that, because I'm not sure if, I know all about what you're saying, but for Gons, I don't want to leave them in the dust here.
So if you think about philosophy, basically there's three branches. Historically, there's ethics, which is right and wrong. There's metaphysics, which is what's real, what's not, what exists, what doesn't. And there's epistemology, which is how do we know what we know, what's true, what's false. What's the difference between a belief and an opinion, or certitude? Can we have certainty, right? So these are different philosophical questions in those branches. And what makes up a worldview, or our philosophy, is those three branches. So what I kind of focused on was how belief systems work, how our presuppositions inform our worldview, how we read the world through the lens of our presuppositions,
right,
and how all those things kind of intertwine. So that's a specific branch of philosophy that's called transcendental argumentation. So that's one of the key areas that I focused on. And then in grad school, I did a lot more focus on the classics. So I do a lot of talks on Plato, Plato's Republic, Platonism. I also have a lot of time that I put into the Church Fathers, which is basically the first 700-800 years of Christianity, how the Bible came to be, the writings of all those Church Fathers. And then what apologetics is basically giving a defense of your beliefs. So that's why I will debate prominent atheists pretty frequently. Don't have any problem debating any of those guys. It usually goes pretty well. To date, I've not lost a debate, which I can say is pretty much everybody agrees. There hasn't been a lost debate yet. So it's relevant for a lot of reasons. I mean, logic, philosophy can help you in business. It can help you in analyzing the news. You look for contradictions. You don't want to be duped and fooled. And when you study these things, on more advanced levels, it almost becomes intuitive at a point. So a lot of people say, well, when you're going into a debate, do you do a lot of preparation? Not really. It just depends on who I'm debating, what the topic is. But typically, when it's like atheist, materialists, or whatever, they kind of always fall back into the same boxes. So there's a limited number of options that they can choose. So I already know the outcomes of where they're going to go with their presuppositions. So that's one of the advantages of presuppositional apologetics is that you already know where people are going to go.
Yeah, I've noticed that for sure.
They're forced. Exactly. They're forced to those conclusions. So it's beneficial for debate. It's beneficial for that. It's beneficial for my theology, which you asked about. And so I'm an Orthodox Christian. So I defend and promote Eastern Orthodox Christianity. So specifically, I attend Russian Orthodox Church, but Orthodoxy is not one nation or branch. It's all these different countries. Orthodoxy is the second biggest so-called Christian grouping in the world after the Roman Catholic Church. So that's what I am a big part of and a big proponent of, and that pretty much informs everything else to a degree. So, I mean, I don't just talk about theology. Obviously, you can see I talk about all kinds of things, but there is a lot of theological material as well.
Sweet, and you see that that worldview has a place in a lot of your work. Mm-hmm. Does that include your comedy?
That's a good question. I never really thought about it, but maybe. I don't know, maybe my comedy is too godless. I don't know. Maybe that's an area I need to clean up. I mean, I haven't really thought about that, but I guess it should inform, and maybe to a degree it does.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm looking through like some of the comedy videos I did. I mean, yeah, to a degree, I would say so. Like sometimes I'm mocking things that I think are ridiculous based on my presuppositions. So yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because even I don't consider myself a comedian. Let me give an example.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. But,
no, please.
One key example popped up, which is a video making fun of. Have you ever seen how people do these DMT trip reports?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I did a video mocking one of those that I think came out really funny. So I'm kind of making fun of that Joe Rogan style worldview where like you'll automatically be enlightened if you do DMT and all this stuff. So that one it came out pretty funny, and that one is based on the fact that I think hallucinogens are far overvalued in that regard.
Oh, sure. Totally. Yeah. Cause I don't claim or consider myself to be a comedian per se, but like to stay on the lighter side of things, make jokes, stuff like that. We've got our show Canary Cry News Talk, which is just ripe for, comedy in the news and things like that, right. Especially regarding transhumanism, AI, robots, that kind of stuff. And I've certainly gotten a lot of criticism. A lot of people don't like it when you make light of things like, even just global elitism or anything having to do with spirituality or religion, or, talking about the Illuminati or even chemtrails. I've gotten people emailing me saying, "Hey, man, chemtrails are no laughing matter."
Yeah.
Well, again, we're not just bots that spit out facts. We're human beings that have multiple facets to our personality, to our being. Unless you happen to be a one-sided human being, I'm not. I have, there's a time. It's like Solomon says in Ecclesiastes. There's a time for every purpose.
Right.
There's a time to be funny. There's a time to be serious. There's a time to have peace. There's a time to go to war. There's a time for all these things. And so it's really just kind of a stunted, one-sided person that doesn't have a sense of humor. I would say that's kind of ridiculous.
Oh, burn.
There's passages in the Bible too, like Psalm 2:4, he who sits in the heavens laughs, the Lord scoffs at them. Right. God does a lot of mocking, especially in the Old Testament there. So it's not unfamiliar. Right. I think he's got a sense of humor with some of this stuff too. So
exactly.
I don't think
the last biblical talk. Yeah, I think you're right. Last biblical talk I did was on the book of Sirach, which is one of the deuterocanonical books, which is really good, by the way. If you haven't read Sirach, I highly recommend it. And I'm doing lectures going all the way through it. A lot of Protestants are enjoying it, by the way. But there's actually funny parts in Sirach. The author of Sirach is he's pretty amusing at times, and he has some really funny quips. So yet another attestation, depending on what biblical canon you accept, that there is a place for humor. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, too. I am working on a project, and I'm reading a book right now. It's a scholarly book called Satire and the Hebrew Prophets, which goes through a lot of comedy, but more specifically satire and irony, in that, the Hebrew prophets used satire before, technically,
it was known. Yeah.
It's academically considered that I believe the Romans sort of invented satire, and then the Hebrew prophets were being satirical thousands of years before that. And
I want that. What's the name of it?
It's called Satire and the Hebrew Prophets. Actually,
writing that down.
Take it for a second. I can actually grab it. I'll give you the author too. 1 second.
Okay, yeah. Seems like definitely an area that it's natural to go to, the sort of humor side of things, because I mean, really, when you start to grasp it, and you said you mentioned earlier how a lot of like recognizing a lot of stuff in culture becomes intuitive, and when it gets to that point where it is intuitive, you start laughing at what you see. You start looking at it, and you kind of go, "Oh my gosh, that is so ridiculous that they did that."
Yeah.
The other part of it too, and I think people like us, when we're actually in it every day and looking at stuff, we move to that place of like, "Oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. We got to laugh at this." We move there sooner than a lot of people that kind of dabble or just kind of look at some of these things as a hobby or whatever. Because they see in pop culture a lot of mocking of that themselves almost. There's a lot of like, I remember the guacamole commercial during the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, like all secret society symbols and all that kind of stuff. And they're sort of making fun of themselves. Like, oh yeah, it's kind of out there now. We just, everybody knows, but here we are kind of making fun of that whole idea. And people that kind of know about that stuff look at that and go, hey, this is a serious matter here. But, that's not where they're at. That's not, something that they're not familiar with it enough to like really see that like this is just ridiculously over the top. And really the best coping mechanism probably is humor and laughing off some of the ridiculous stuff that we see. But I mean, for me personally, anytime I'm looking at stuff, every day, if I commented on the things that I find funny every day, it would just be, I don't think people would necessarily get it, but I think I would lose a lot of followers because they'd be like, what, I don't see why you think this is funny. Some of the serious stuff with like AI.
It's a risky maneuver.
Yeah, it is a risky maneuver. In fact, when some of the first comedic stuff I did, I thought it was funny, and I look back and I still think it's funny. But initially, I had trepidation about doing it because I thought, well, people aren't going to think that. And it was kind of iffy. Like they were like, what is this? We thought you did serious stuff. Why are you being like a retard now? And it was because, I was like, well, yeah, but this is another aspect of my person. And,
this is me. And they're like,
this is actually who I am. Most of the time I'm pretty ridiculous.
It's a dangerous thing being vulnerable like that, just
thinking about butt sex all day and butt sex magic. I'm actually interested in other things in life and not all this dark bullshit time. So
right. Yeah, it's called Satire and the Hebrew Prophets by Thomas Jemility. Jemility. Yeah, and you see that especially when you consider Jesus Christ and his obvious very knowledgeable and influence from the Hebrew prophets. I mean, that's what you get for being a rabbi. You got to know a lot about the Hebrew prophets, and
he knows better than anybody because
that's right.
He inspired, the Old Testament prophets.
Totally, yeah, exactly, and and you see even Jesus using humor a lot specifically satire and humor in his ministry, which we don't really think about a lot because, we kind of read Jesus as very, holy. And, but, when he's talking about even why worry about the speck in someone else's eye when you have a log in yours?
Yeah, like when he says
it's a humorous idea.
When he talks to the Pharisees and he says, like even to Nicodemus, you're the teacher of the law and you don't know that Moses says this.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of like, that's being sarcastic, right?
Yeah. Right. And so, humor, and of course, humor back then is a little bit different than it is now culturally. But when you take everything into context, a lot of what Jesus was doing was satirical and funny. And so, I think taking an example from the big man, I think it's okay to try to work a little bit of comedy into teaching the truth.
Right.
There you go. Well, cool. There you go, man. We're changing the way it's
changing the landscape. At least you're doing well with it. I rolled out the I Heart 5G t-shirts and nobody liked it. No, everybody got so mad, and I'm like, okay, I'll take that down. Nobody
Come
got
on,
it.
man. The punchline didn't land.
Yeah, everyone was like, "I'll get it if it's a broken heart," which isn't the worst idea, but at the same time, I'm like, you kind of
takes away the punchline.
Yeah,
It is funny when those. Yeah, I've had a few vids bomb pretty bad, but on the whole, they do well. But actually, like that DMT one, a lot of people didn't get that it was satire, which cracks me up because I Andy Kaufman level trolled them pretty well. So they actually thought that I was this idiot doing his DMT report, saying all this nonsense, and I said really ridiculous stuff. And I got like at least 100 comments saying like, "Bro, like, dude, I don't even think you really did it, man, because like you're saying, you just sound like an idiot, man." I'm like, obviously I am lying and joking and being. Listen, obviously I didn't do it.
Ironically, it's validating the absurdity of their own.
It is yeah, because they're not smart enough to figure out this is obviously a joke, dude.
So I got a couple questions. You not to move on too quick if you had something to add, but you mentioned, hey, you've been tapped for maybe developing some television programs, or you've pursued that, or are currently pursuing options in that case. And Gons and I, we've thrown that around a little bit. We've had some connections in that area. Obviously, nothing has come to fruition. Still holding out though. All our Hollywood listeners. Moving into that arena, is there any concern about the repercussions of something like that, or the involvement in the television industry?
Signing your soul away to the devil.
Or have you experienced anything, or look forward to experiencing anything that sort of maybe parallels to the type of stuff that you have pretty much spent a lot of time exposing or exploring and bringing light to?
Maybe initially I was a little skeptical when the offer was made. I don't know if you know who Jay Widener is, but he made the Kubrick documentary. He was in Room 237, which is a famous Kubrick documentary.
Sweet. Yeah.
And then Widener did 2 Kubrick documentaries on his own. So Jay reached out to me after my book came out and he said, "Hey, would you like to work with me on a TV show?" And I thought it was, I don't know. I was like, "Is this a joke?" I didn't take him seriously. And he's like, "Well, no, come down here and visit, and see what you think." And so I went and saw the studios and met the people at Gaia. And at that time they got Sean Stone to move from Lip TV in LA to Gaia. So what ended up happening was the idea was tossed around. What if we took kind of roughly the way that you do film analysis and then do a Siskel Ebert style show with you and Jay? And so that's what we did. And so we did one full season. That's what I'm most proud of, by the way. I never would have dreamed I would have been able to do that. The other thing I'm most proud of is being in that Sean Stone's documentary with Oliver Stone. So that was like I never would have dreamed that I would ever have one day be in a documentary with Oliver Stone and I'd get to have a TV show and all. So it's like fulfilling a lot of dreams that you never thought would have happened. And then the actual experience of doing it, no, there wasn't any compromise. I wasn't offered any Illuminati millionaire, you get to sleep with goats or whatever. Nothing like that's ever happened. It wasn't, it's not that big of a deal. It's nice to be able to do it, but it's not like I didn't make like $1 million on the TV show. It's not, you don't make what you think you might make.
Right.
Yeah.
But I do have an IMDb now, by the way, although my picture's not actually there. I do have an IMDb. So, and not everybody can get an IMDb unless you're on the internet. Right. Unless you're on the internet. I'm joking. Anybody can have an IMDb. But no, so nothing bad has happened. I don't feel like I've compromised because it was just really a lot of what was in the book. I did have to kind of rewrite the screenplay for the season or whatever.
Yeah, well, it's cool that that it got tapped for material that you were already producing. The value of your material alone didn't warrant too much development or going back to the workshop to get it ready for air. So
you guys should watch it. I'm not trying to brag, but I really am proud of the TV show, and it came out awesome. Everybody liked it. It was a little too cerebral for the network. And by the way, I don't work for Gaia. I got paid by Jay's company, so it wasn't anything to do with Gaia per se.
Got it.
But it's a really cool show. Basically, it's just the stuff that you and I are talking about now, we're just dissecting film for 30 minutes.
What's it called again?
It's called Hollywood Decoded.
Oh, right.
If you look it up, you'll see it.
Some of it.
Yeah, I think I've I've at least seen some marketing for it.
The show is really good. I'm not just saying that. I mean, we did Roman Polanski, we did James Cameron, we did some other films. We did
right.
Not them.
Yeah, it looks like Kubrick.
Look at this old crusty old. Look at this crusty old white guy. Look at this crusty.
Titanic and Avatar, Blade Runner, Chinatown, Batman Begins, Minority Report. Wow, you did get a nice little full season here, huh?
Yeah, it's
19 episodes.
Yeah, and actually there were 23 we filmed, so 4 awesome ones got canned, which kind of broke my heart, but that's okay.
Ooh,
they got rid of Rosemary's Baby, Mulholland Drive, and The Alien.
Interesting. Why do you think they cut those?
They said they were too dark to air.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Mulholland Drive was a pretty dark movie too. I think I remember seeing
Well, what I
one.
did was, I made a video on my own, and I just uploaded to my YouTube channel my Mulholland Drive analysis, which it did okay. I'm happy with it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's
Cool.
on Gaia TV. They want 99 cents for me to sign up for a week here, so
although
I'll have to wait till payday.
You can watch, if you scroll down to the Lord of the Rings episode, you can watch that one free.
Ah, okay.
Oh yeah, I see
I'm
the
gonna
free
do
tag
that.
there. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, very cool.
We got a new show in the mix being shopped around. And this will be different. It won't be anything to do with Gaia or that stuff. This is totally different. Producer. And it's me and 3 other people commenting on all of pop culture. So it's not Hollywood. It's, music, it's movies, it's everything. So if that gets bought, that'll be really cool. But don't know what's going to happen with that.
Yeah, you never know, man. Show business is slow business, as they say.
Right.
Yeah. No, nobody says that.
Well, it's true.
I know. Everything happens so slowly. Well, that's rad. And it's not often that a guy who does what the stuff that we're doing and people like us do has the opportunity to kind of get into a traditional sort of medium like that,
Right.
besides doing like a YouTube or something. So I'm happy for you.
What's my Illuminati connections?
There you go. I was going to say, that was going to be my next question.
Well, if you do have some success, that's what people will say. They'll say, oh, it's only because you come from
yeah. That's
CIA family or something.
Gons and I barely qualify for any sort of minor success. And there are full conspiracy theories about me being Gons's gay CIA handler.
Yeah, about how I'm a Japanese Jesuit Nazi. So that's those things are out there.
Yeah.
I don't really. I mean, I think we need to do just one big debunk, Basil, but we haven't gotten around to it because
I kind of like it.
You got a fat ass channel, dude. You got like 250,000.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's been weird the last this whole 2019. Actually, they've kept me in 257,000 subscribers, and for the first time, there's like huge dips where there, large number of people unsubscribe, and they've just kind of kept me at 257,000. It's really weird. Every time it starts moving up, they just I have negative days, and it just goes back down to
right.
Yeah, but that's kind of the game right now. Everything's happening.
It is the trickery. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's good that you're, definitely someone like you. You're doing, you're figuring out ways to, I guess, monetize, so to speak, the things that you do in various ways other than just YouTube. Because obviously,
and I think the key too is to think about multiple ways to do it. So not just relying on one form, but if you can have the Patreon, and if you can have a book, and if you can have a channel, and if you can do other things, it's a lot better than just relying on.
Oh yeah, no, you got to have multiple streams. There ain't one person paying or signing your paycheck anymore.
Exactly.
So now, just to get back on track a little bit, what is your current excitement? What topic? What project? What's the thing currently holding your attention? So we all know you got to switch around a lot to stay entertained yourself and engaged yourself. What's currently holding your attention?
Well, I'm really interested. I got really interested in Minds of Men, Aaron and Melissa's documentary. Got to go hang out with them last week, meet them. That was really cool. And we did some filming. So their next documentary project, which I can't say what it is. She made me promise. He made me promise not to say. But so it will have a big chunk of me, thank God.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we had Melissa on the show not too long ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, there may be some, you might have some competition for airtime on that thing.
I don't doubt there's other people involved. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, just
it's just like, about you, Jay.
Yeah, they're just doing a documentary on me. And no. I just meant that I'm looking forward to being in work of people that I respect is what I'm getting at.
Right,
right.
I think do really good work. It was an honor, honestly. That's how I view it.
Awesome.
Call it the mind